Hey, Joe Escobedo here, and welcome back to the episode of the B2B Marketing Asia podcast. I'm here today in CNN Singapore office with Rob Bradley, and today we're talking about the CNN Film School, as well as some of their work across the region with companies like Genesis and others. So, Rob, I'm keen to hear, what is the CNN Film School and how did it come to be?
The CNN Film School is an initiative that we've done with Genesis, the automaker, but perhaps to start at really why we work with any brand, to give a bit of context. I think we all know brands want to be and are storytellers. When you move on to a specific example of that, the CNN Film School is a good example. If you look at what Genesis are trying to achieve, is really associate themselves with this, one, to become a global luxury car brand, but also associate with incredible craftsmanship, art, the new generation of people that are helping changing the world through perhaps utilizing heritage, but in a modern way. So innovation around craftsmanship. So essentially the film school provided this kind of marriage of creating an environment where we had contributors from some of the greatest filmmakers in the world, people like Denis Villeneuve, who created Dune. I don't know if you've seen Dune.
Yeah.
Amazing film. It blew my mind. I loved it. Giving a masterclass on how he made it and what inspires him. To Hong Dong-hyuk, who created Squid Games.
Yeah.
Again, giving a masterclass on how he created Squid Games. And marrying this kind of this the people at the top of their game, but also then linking it to actually a fellowship that we created. So again, using people to tell real stories. And we found two up-and-coming filmmakers at university in South Korea and two in the US. We gave them a $15,000 grant. We had mentors from CNN. And essentially, we created a platform for them to create a story. Often they were pretty much all human-led stories. Give them guidance to how to create this video using our expertise. Obviously, they have access to the masterclasses that these amazing directors created as well. And then distributing them to the world. It was a really perfect example of the brand wanted to be associated with craftsmanship and up-and-coming innovation around craftsmanship. They wanted to associate themselves with people that are doing remarkable things, and also a very premium space of filmmaking. Those directors, very premium filmmakers, if you like that word. Premium maybe doesn't make sense, but maybe they're incredible people, these filmmakers. And then out of that, ultimately, as a media owner, we have to give people content that they like. Ultimately, it's about producing this incredible editorial concept that aligns with this brand. They get to sponsor around it, which essentially enables this to take place. And then our audience loved it. And that's why we had huge amounts of engagement, both on our own platforms and of course across social.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. Like I said, if I was I'm not sure if there's an age limit, but I would have loved to apply for such a program. It sounds very cool.
Well, the other thing is it hasn't finished yet in terms of the concept of the film school. It is ongoing. And actually all the studios, the big studios where the directors took place, they really liked it. So now we've created this community of people, both from the world's best to up and coming directors and visual storytellers, you could say. And this community is getting built. So maybe the part two you can get involved in, because I don't think there was an age limit, but it was certainly people that are budding, and they were at university, but they weren't all necessarily 18 or 19. Some of them were a bit older as well.
Yeah, very cool. And you said some of the stories are still in progress. Are there any ones that are finished that you can share?
But a huge amount's finished. The campaign, the sort of first part of the campaign is finished essentially, but because it's such a good concept and the audience loves it, it's an editorial concept basically as well. It continues. And one of the stories that one of the directors in Seoul created in Korea was around the city mermaid. And it was around this lady that had been free diving, so diving without oxygen for shellfish for 6 generations, and telling her story, what it means to the community. It was just amazing. And that's where we always try to be when we're working with brands. A way to, instead of talking about a product, is really talk about how a person has achieved something, or an adversity they've beaten, or something that has some sort of emotional impact on the audience, because that engages them, that leaves them with something. It could be education, it could leave them with a happy, motivated. It could have been sad at the start, but perhaps they leave feeling happy and motivated that someone's beaten this adversity or whatever it is. And then when you look at brands, what brands are trying to achieve at the moment as well, a lot of it is around purpose, and whether it's sustainability, climate, and so on. So telling the story of an impact that a brand has had on people, in this instance, Genesis had an impact on these 4 young filmmakers that in turn will inspire other generations of filmmakers, as film school is doing, is having an impact on the future. So when you do that through people, it works really well.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of cool stories for the audience. And the question the brands always have is, yes, I want to highlight my purpose,
yes,
but what is the impact that it's having? So I'm curious to hear what is some of the impact that it's had, maybe that you've seen from either the audience or from the brand.
Absolutely. We, sadly, and funnily enough, we really have to prove that what we do works today. Long gone are the days where it's thank you for the IO and we just fling out a campaign on our platforms to an audience and then wait for the next quarter for the next deal. Everything we do is underpinned by data today and insight, and that actually starts right at the beginning. We know what our audiences are interested in. We're uniquely positioned that we cover so many different topics, obviously from news and breaking news, but within business, within travel, within style, within technology, and all the different strands underneath that. And because it's truly global and reaches several 100 million people a month, we can get these trends. So we know what people are interested in. That actually informs our production in the first place on the commercial side. So we know what audiences are interested in, and we use that data to obviously help inform the pitch when we're going to a client, say, hey, look, we understand this audience and we know what you're trying to achieve. And then when a campaign goes out there, we obviously have to prove all of that.
Yeah.
And we have a bit of a hook around trying to get real business insights for them and really shifting the needle. But because this whole project was really embraced by our audiences, there's metrics like 11 million people engaging with the content and millions of people engaging with the actual videos themselves. There was real uplift in the perception of Genesis and people really thinking about, I think it was, 89% of people that consumed the campaign said it improved their perception, and 83% said they would consider it as part of their next car purchase. So that also means that we're reaching the right kind of audience. Underpinning all of that as well, of course, is data targeting to, in this instance, luxury product intenders, people that we know that consume fashion content, art content, and so on. And then we, again, inform the client on how that's worked. But I would also say that the other outcome that within this is that purpose bit around providing a platform to these voices, doing it authentically, these new directors, doing something that has longevity and that means something mattered as well.
Yeah, no, I love it as a series. And like I said, you can continue it on and on because of the editorial approach.
Yes.
I guess it goes back to also managing client expectations. So obviously some marketers might say, okay, our KPI here is the number of new sales you can close within a particular quarter, for example. Now, obviously that's not realistic. So I think that, how do you manage those expectations?
Yeah, it's a good question, and the multi-billion-dollar question within marketing. And we know where we're at. We are a brand play predominantly. We're in the business of doing quite large campaigns, if that makes sense. All the things that large means, like big productions, high quality, premium. The pricing is premium as a result because of some of that. But we do also have this very mass scale as well. So it's premium plus scale. When we work with our partners, many of our biggest partners have been with us some have been with us for decades. We launched 42 years ago. Many across this region have been with us for 10 plus years. So I think Genesis started in 2016. So as a key marketing partner that needs to get their brand out, get people to understand it's a luxury brand, get people to think about associating it with fine craftsmanship and art and all of these things. We've done that successfully, otherwise we wouldn't have the long-term partnerships.
Yeah, I think that makes sense for a lot of the existing clients. I guess the challenge is bringing on new clients and then having them re-explaining. But I think the fact that you have a clear value proposition, I was going to ask you this question as well too, because a lot of different media companies have started launching their own branded content studios
within the house, in-house. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So I'm curious, how do you differentiate when it comes to that? Because I think it's a main challenge for a lot of marketers.
Yeah, it's like you said, most brands have these kind of in-house creative studios or at least teams that create content, whether it's written word, video predominantly, and their goal, I think, is both to obviously create this content to inform their existing customers, but also to win over new customers. And there's a difference between those two things. I think the challenge for them is getting the right views and audiences on it. Of course, you can go out to social and buy audiences. I think The whole media space, though, and you will know this, is incredibly cluttered, right? It is noisy out there. And a marketer's job today is incredibly hard. Which platform do they work? Which data providers do they work? Which media companies do they work with? What do they do themselves? What do they do with their agency? What do they do? It's incredibly complex. And data is underpinning all of that. And I think the industry's got very good at making data-driven decisions, as it should. But it's still incredibly complex. You put your mind in and then into an audience is getting bombarded over the day. And, you know, I don't know about you, but I check about, as soon as I wake up, I've done like 20 platforms I've checked out from various things. I wish I didn't. I'm trying to leave my phone on the other side of the room, but it doesn't work. It's very cluttered and it's very noisy. The fan base and audience that we have essentially are used to seeing stories from us that have a certain voice and tone that they trust. So that is what we're lending to those brands. We wouldn't take someone's content that they've made because it wouldn't have CNN's voice. So, and I would add, just to extend that question, is if at the moment we barely see a brief without sustainability impact and DV&I, all these areas, which is great. And I think these brands are genuinely passionate about this space as well. And as are we, going back to our purpose, information to the world that can help change, help drive people to make decisions to make the world better. If a brand is looking to tell their audience or win new customers about what they're doing to make the world better, because we as consumers are demanding that from our brands now, then CNN has that voice to be able to do that for them. But they have to be authentic. Ideally, they should have data about what they're doing. There should be longevity to what they're doing, and it should align with their own purpose of their own organization as well. But some of that's still being created, and then brands are, on the whole, being incredibly authentic with it. COVID sped it up, but that is a difference between why someone would work with us. And I think there's space for it all, really. And I can totally understand why brands have their own content creators as well.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of kind of the media landscape is, yes, it is very noisy, but at the same time, each kind of media company essentially but they cater to a particular type of market. They have their own style. And I think there's always different ways to navigate that space because, like you said, you want to ultimately go where your audience is. And so if you know that CNN or specific has that audience, then it makes sense to go there because you're getting direct access to that audience in a large way.
Exactly. And I don't think we don't try and CNN, we don't try and fight audience behavior either. And we're definitely as much a digital company as we are a TV company now, arguably more. I always talk about us, we're a data company now, we're a creative agency, we do media buying, we're a research organization, obviously, because we have to prove so much. And that piece around having to be all of that is ultimately geared up to being understanding what human behavior is, what human behavior is changing and driving from a media consumption perspective, how that affects our clients, what we can tell them about how whether they're marketing with us or not, we can give them information to help them make smart business decisions. But ultimately, of course, we utilize the platforms outside of our own to send these messages to people where they are.
All right. So I'm curious, what were some of the key learnings from this initiative?
I think firstly, you really need to understand what a client is looking for, and having a long-term relationship with a client helps with that because you've built that trust, you've built a relationship where you can say what worked, what didn't work. So I think having that sort of truly transparent relationship with a client where you really need to understand their goals, really explain and try and use data to help explain what's worked and what's not worked with them in the past and what's going to work in the future. Because we knew our audience is interested in films and entertainment. We knew that our audience is interested in human-led stories. They trusted us with that, of course. So there's that trust element there. And then when it goes out into the world, I suppose it's really about learning what bits worked for our audiences, which bits didn't. I think this was a rare case where most of the content worked, to be honest, because it was in such a sweet spot that all of us love within great visual storytelling. And then off the back of it is really proving that it worked. And I think the learning for us on that front is, have we changed opinion? What sort of technologies can we use today? And I gave those stats out, but underneath the fact that we've changed perception or people are more likely to buy a Genesis car is that there is technologies from semantic, contextual targeting that enables to hit audiences that we can influence, that are relevant for the brand. There's technology that we have to understand people's feelings and sentiments on certain films that we push out, both on our own and operate and off-platform factory. So underneath this sort of quite broad stats is actually this incredibly sophisticated, complex technology. So I suppose there's a complexity behind a campaign like this that you can see quite a simple hub and video being made and social campaign all quite clear. But in the background, there's this complexity. And I think that translating that complexity into simple, real outcomes is sometimes quite hard. And I think that can apply to any campaign at the moment.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you as well, too, because obviously we rely a lot on data, and data can give us a lot of information on sentiment and reactions and things like that. I'm curious, there's obviously the human element of evaluating some of these things from the feedback from the audience, things like that. How does that come into play when you're doing some of these evaluations, in addition to the data, which you talked about?
I think it's interesting. There's still room. Like most of what we have now is even at the AI end of like really machine learning, we have tools that understand how our content travels across the internet and the conversations it sparks. We talk about it, i.e. if CNN says something, people listen. It means more if someone from CNN says something than it does elsewhere. And again, that's the reason why brands work with us, particularly in that purpose space. But there's incredibly sophisticated technology. But then there's also a space for simple surveys, for people to feedback, for, of course, creating a community that the editorial team, because of course we're a journalist organization, they've created a community of people from the film world and from up and coming producers that are now part of something. And I think sometimes as an industry, we get bogged down on this smart technology and using words like semantic targeting like I just did. Yeah. But actually we've created a community now, and that community gives feedback, wants to take part. And then on top of that, of course, is asked for their opinions.
Yeah, I guess it's a tricky situation because on the marketer side and the brand side, they have to report internally.
Of course, yeah.
So a lot of these figures do help them. At the same time, I'm always weary of just relying on the data to prove that something is successful or unsuccessful, because as much data as you have, there's always a way to not manipulate it, but to skew it in a way where, you're telling a specific story that you want to tell.
There is, and on top of that, though, like data doesn't lie, so it shouldn't do if it's not being manipulated. But you're right, how do you get that right with just the human side of, hang on, I wish our job was this easy, but we like to think not many CMOs or CEOs would be, why CNN on the plan? It doesn't mean we're relevant for all campaigns, of course. We're relevant for specific things. So if you take that perspective, there is just the sort of thing that, hey, you're working with a very premium organization, you're going to hit a certain scale. All these things still matter. And then, of course, engagement. Are people actually consuming this and watching it? All of that stuff, that traditional stuff that a media company does, is still super important. But we have to be a data company too. We have to.
Yes, we all have to.
Yeah. I was a traditional salesperson that got into data. And 11 years ago, I was onboarding as a salesperson, because no one would do it. I was saying, hey, this programmatic stuff seems really interesting, data management. And I started working with certain technologies and actually put them on our site. So I learned how to become a sort of data expert myself. And I would not have my career without it. So when I tell people and give people advice on careers, it's embrace the new and put your hand up for things. Because if I didn't put my hand up for programmatic 11 years ago or 10 years ago, there's no way I would have this career. And I feel like all of us, I feel sometimes people in media, I'm having a bit of a side chat,
good.
But I feel like sometimes people in media, a lot of us fell into it after university, and a lot of sociable people. I did sports at university. It was social life that I liked, and media has a great social life.
Yeah.
A lot of big personalities, has a bit of competition as well, like sports and so on. There's people, all of us are very capable, and our salespeople are now data experts, and they should be. And there's a sophistication that the industry now has that means we're challenging ourselves much more than what the traditional media did in terms of selling ad space. We all now have to be data literate. We have to really understand the creative process and storytelling process. We have to understand what our audiences want and the changing behaviors there, which every month there's something new. And I love that side of it. I think it gives people good careers.
I think that's great advice, because I work with a lot of students and also a lot of salespeople. And if I look at salespeople just at the spectrum across the world, I think they tend to be a bit more conservative in their approach. I think they're the kind of people that like, hey, it's worked before, why won't it work again? But I think to your point, things are changing, technology, not only in sales, but also the way we operate. is more and more prevalent. So you have to learn that, otherwise you'll be obsolete, which
exactly
I'm glad you did.
You would be. Yeah, if you don't innovate, there's not much chance for you.
Great advice from my students. Last question is, hindsight is always 2020. If you had to change anything from what you've done so far, maybe for the next series, what would you do?
Specifically within this campaign? If we had to change something, I would think about perhaps how we could use other platforms, perhaps, and I don't want to use that buzzword, but I am going to say the metaverse. Ding! Or some sort of more interactive element for the consumer in a different platform, something like that. I'm on the commercial side. It's an editorial initiative, so obviously that's done. There's always things you can do different and improve, and who knows, maybe the next one will feature something like that.
Stay tuned for that.
Stay tuned.
Awesome. Rob, I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing this story with
Pleasure.
us. It's been super helpful.
Really enjoyed it. Thanks for inviting me, Jim.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Cheers.